All right, so what exactly are we doing here today?
Well, I'm at the Clearing Library because I'm going to give a talk on my book, actually. Chicago, when Hollywood landed at Chicago's Midway Airport.
Yes.
The photos and stories of Mike Rotunnno. Mike Rotunnno was a photographer who lived at the airport, practically lived at the airport for 50 years. And so I got to know his family, and they allowed me to share some of his pictures, you know, John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart, and all the movie stars would come into to Midway, Dorothy Lamour, and Mike would take their pictures.
Yeah, wow. How did you initially get in contact?
Well, I had written another book. This was my book. I wrote it about 10 years ago on Midway Airport, and in this book, I had a section on Mike Rotunnno because I got to know the daughters. These are the daughters, Judy and Mimi, with Abbott and Costello here, and they this was their youth hanging out with the stars.
Yeah.
So I got to know Mimi and Judy, and they were kind enough to share the pictures because I told them, you should write a book. They said, well, you should write it for us.
What initially got you interested in the history of Midway Airport?
Well, my grandfather had a business at Midway called Monarch Air Service for about 70 years. He was a pilot, and so I worked out there as a kid. So that. I have a family connection to the airport.
Wow. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Nice meeting you.
Welcome to the Clearing Branch Library. My name is Rob Matunjak. I'm the manager of the library. But also welcome on behalf of the Clear Ridge Historical Society. We're a nonprofit historical society covering the history of the areas of Garfield Ridge, Clearing, and some of the surrounding communities like Summit, Stickney, and Bedford Park. We keep historical files here at the library, and we try to do a program about once every other month. This is just part of our regular program series. You can find us on Facebook, and I can give you some contact information, email and phone numbers and stuff for our society later if anybody's interested. And on behalf of the Chicago Public Library and the Historical Society, I'd also like to acknowledge today we have cable station CAN TV here filming us today, filming Chris today. And we also have with us a local, just brand new local online newspaper called the Southwest Chicago Post, and they're going to be filming us. And you can visit them at southwestchicagopost.com. They'll be posting a video of tonight's event shortly. And because of Southwest Chicago Post, and also on behalf of the Fasano Pie Company, I'm happy to announce that everybody in attendance today will get their own personal size Fasano pie. The Fasano Pie Company, Peter Fasano, Grant. I'm sorry, Chris, I made it hard to live up to that. But everyone, so afterwards, if everyone would just check in, we have blueberry, cherry, and apple pies, personal size for everyone in attendance. So on behalf of Chicago Public Library and Clear Ridge Historical Society, I'd like to welcome our speaker tonight, Christopher Lynch. Christopher spent much of his life around Midway Airport, where his family ran Monarch Air Service. And he's always had a fascination with the airport because of his research and his family photo collection. He had a lot to do with the creation of the documentary about Midway Airport called Crossroads to the World. And of course, his first book, which was Chicago's Midway Airport, the first 75 years. And now on to his second book, which is When Hollywood Landed at Chicago's Midway Airport, the photos of Mike Rotunnno. And without further ado, let's welcome Christopher Lynch.
Thank you, Rob. Rob and I were talking before the presentation. I got an email from Rob a couple weeks ago, and he said, Chris, I'm thinking about doing a program on your new book. And I said, great, because I had spoken here the last time about this book. And Rob's, and this one, by the way, to put the presentation together, I mean, I swear to God, I spent about 3 months just thinking about the transitions and everything else. So I was thinking this would be great to give a presentation on this book, October, November, December. And Rob said, oh yeah, by the way, it's next week. So, and I was leaving on vacation. And I was like, okay. So I went out to New England and I did a lot of swimming. And in the ponds of New England, I thought a lot about Midway Airport. And so, but I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very excited to talk about this book. Also, what made it easy is Rob has a digital projector, which 10 years ago when we did the other book, they didn't exist. So I was able to select photos from the archive, Mike Rotunnno archive, and put them together rather quickly thanks to Rob's projector. Now I just wanted to let you know, this book has 85 pictures of movie stars and celebrities at Midway Airport. You're going to see only 2 from this book. What I'm going to show you is all stuff that wasn't in the book, because if I was to write the dream book, it would have been 1,000 pages. But I was limited in space and time, so I thought I would just explore that. So, Rob, let's get started here. This is Monarch Air Service, circa 1935, maybe, Bob Russo? Yeah. This is my grandfather's Staggered Wing Beach here in the foreground. My grandfather was a pilot. His name was Scotty O'Carroll. His real name was Pierce, but they called him Scotty. He was from Ireland. I think they thought he was from Scotland or something from his accent. Or maybe he was just cheap, but they called him Scotty. And he started a business. He actually learned how to fly at Ashburn Field, which was at 81st and Cicero, I believe. He used to fly into this airport Midway when it was called Municipal many times in the early to mid-1920s, before the city really knew what it wanted to do with this airport. But anyway, he got serious about flying in the 30s. He started a business. What I like about this picture is the Staggered Wing Beach and the leather seats inside. And when it landed, he would have to radio the hangar, and they'd have to drive out and meet him. The guys would jump out, and they would sit on the wings because it was so unstable to taxi it in. But this is why I got interested in Midway because of the family tradition. We had a lot of pictures at the hangar. We had a hangar on Central Avenue that was sold in 1997. And my father had all these really neat Midway pictures. And this one hung on the wall, and I was always fascinated with this one. I like politics. So what you have is Mayor Richard J. Daley, but he wasn't mayor at the time. Harry Truman, president, and Mike Berry. I think he was the airport manager at the time. So what happened is I used to stare at this picture. I had no idea that Mike Rotunnno took this picture. I would find out later that. But Mike Rotunnno was a photographer who made his living taking pictures at the airport. He was Italian. He was actually born in Italy. The actress Marion Hopkins called him a gangster to his face and ran away from him. I don't think he looked like a gangster, but this is what if you were Marilyn Monroe or Cary Grant or John Wayne, this is the view you would get of Mike Rotunnno when you stepped off the plane. Now, most of the time, people were happy to pose for pictures because, again, it goes along with the job, right? If you're a movie star, not always, but he was not paparazzi. He was the kind of celebrity who, once the picture was taken, he would sit with you in a coffee shop and catch up and talk. And many stars would hang with Mike, just enjoy the time together. Now, this is how Mike made his living. And it's interesting to me because when you look at the picture, you think, John Wayne, okay, so this would run in the newspaper. But John Wayne didn't pay Mike Rotunnno, and the Hollywood studios didn't pay Mike Rotunnno. TWA paid Mike Rotunnno. You see the logo? A lot because Mike Rotunno's daughters, that's Judy on your left, and that's Mimi on your right. And I got to know Judy and Mimi through my first book. They lent me a couple pictures for this book, and then Judy at the time lived in South Carolina, and I was going there on spring break with my family, and she invited me over for dinner, and she said, oh, by the way, Chris, let me show you my dad's pictures. So she gets out a binder, and I'm looking at these pictures, and I can't believe these photographs. And I said to Judy, you should write a book about your dad. And she agreed with me, and then a few months went by, and she called me up, and she said, no, I can't do it, Chris, it's too emotional. I just can't do it. Why don't you write the book about my father? And I rather innocently said, sure, why not? Now, at the time, I had 4-year-old triplets, 2 girls and a boy, and I have a full-time job. So I said, yeah, sure, I'll help you write it. And then afterwards, I was like, what am I doing here? I have no time. I still have no time. So that's why it took me 8 years to write this book. It literally took me 8 years to write. Logo of TWA, that's what paid the freight. Because people were afraid to fly in the 40s and the 50s. Well, maybe in the 60s it started to turn around. But a lot of people were they're scared to fly. Maybe your grandparents were just, I'm not getting up on one of those things. And if you think about it, why would you? Because you had the Lakeshore Limited and the, what was the other train, the Empire, the Ranch in New York, Broadway Limited. You could get to super cheap, right? You could get to the West Coast and the East Coast in just terrific comfort, fast, efficient. So the airlines were trying to get people to get on in their airplanes and sit in their seats. So go to the next slide. So these logos needed to be in the public's mind, and so Mike would get paid if the logo appeared in the photo. And he made his living doing that for 50 years. So again, check out the logo. In fact, this is a good shot because I think you can see 3 places. And again, framing a photograph is important. I see it up there above the windows. I see it to the left of John Wayne, and to the right you see TWA as well. So that was a good picture for Mike Rotunnno. This is how you spot a Rotunnno photo. And if you go onto eBay, that's the giveaway. This is Vice President Richard Nixon and his wife Pat at the airport. I believe the Vice President is stepping off of a supercarry. I bought this photo from the Tribune photo service. This was interesting for me because, again, I saw a lot of photos on the internet, and I couldn't verify if they were Mike Rotunnno pictures. Look at the picture. This is the proof, the Holy Grail, because what it says here is it says Midway Airport, Mike Rotunnno, photographer, and then they have the caption. But what's interesting, this was February 14th, 1954. The Tribune did not give a photo credit to Mike Rotunnno. Mike Rotunnno didn't care. He just wanted to get the check. He had 2 daughters to support. So a lot of his pictures ran in just about every paper, Chicago American, Sun-Times, Tribune, Time Magazine, whatever it was. But for me to verify if they were truly Rotunnno pictures, I had to look for the telltale signs, again, the logos, and even better, if you could look at the back of the photo. And would also often say Metro News, which was his company that he formed to get the photos out. And these photos, by the way, he would take the picture, in a dark room, he would develop it, and then he would call a taxi, and the taxi would deliver the photograph. And in those days, there were 8 newspapers in town. So there'd be 8 taxis going to down because, again, there was no television really to speak of in some of the early years, so you just wanted to get the pictures out. I don't know if this is a Rotunnno photo. I think it is. This is young John F. Kennedy. I don't think he's 25 in this picture. I mean, he's really young. I like the logo. I think it's a Rotunnno picture. I know that he knew the Kennedy family very well. He knew Joe Kennedy very well. There are many pictures of John F. Kennedy that Rotunnno shot that I verified, but I don't know if this is one. So that was one reason that it didn't run in the book. All the photos that ran in the book were verified as Rotunnno pictures because I physically held the pictures and saw with Rotunnno. And that's important for copyright reasons as well. This is one of my favorite pictures, Katharine Hepburn. This was taken in 1933, I believe. Mike Rotunnno was in the terminal, the little terminal, the white building, of course, on Cicero. And he saw her sleeping on a bench, like sprawled, very unladylike. And he waited for her to wake up. And he sat there for an hour. 4 in the morning, he sat there like this. And then she wakes up and she goes, "Oh my God, it's you." And she says, "Get out of here." And he said, "Hey lady, you look like hell. I could have taken your picture and put it in every paper in America. I waited for you to wake up." She's like, "Oh yeah? Yeah." He says, "Why don't you get in the bathroom and clean yourself up? And then I'll take your picture." And she's like, okay. So then she went to the bathroom and she kind of did this and did that. And then she stepped in front of United Airlines, see the logo, right? She stepped in front of United Airlines, and that's why Katharine Hepburn is a star. I mean, is there anybody more glamorous? My wife was looking at that picture, and I'm like, wow, look at that smile. And my wife was like, look at that coat. And my daughter, Catherine, said, look at those shoes. That's a movie star, folks. Because he was at the airport, the airlines would say, "Hey, Mike, can you take some pictures, just for promotional reasons?" Sure. So this is a nice photo of, I believe it's United Airlines stewardesses at the airport. Now, how many people used to go to Club El Bianco? Are you still full? Had a fiesta dinner, did you? At Club El Bianco, which I believe is across from St. Rita's.
Yes.
Yes. Henry Bianco, Hank, he was very good friends with Mike Rotunnno. And so a lot of the times the stars would come in and they'd have a layover. They'd fly into Los Angeles or New York, and they had maybe a 3-hour layover. And they liked the cloud room, mind you, but they'd eaten there many times. So Mike Rotunnno would say, "Hey, I'll call my friend Hank at Club El Bianco and we'll give you a nice meal." So the stars would go there, and I actually drove it. I wanted to see how long it took. Not speeding or anything, stopping at stoplights. It took me 15 minutes from where the little terminal would have been to get to Club El Bianco. So that was enough time. If he knew a star was coming in, he'd call, the kitchen would get everything going, and then by the time Humphrey Bogart showed up, the food was ready. The thing about the stars is they would go to Club El Bianco the first time, and then on the way back they would be like, "Wow, that was a great meal. Let's go back there." So on their way back to LA, they would stop on their own sometimes at Club El Bianco. Leo Carrillo, of course, we all know him as
Pancho.
Right. Peter Cisco. Dr. Malo, the Cisco kid. This is Judy Rotunnno next to him. Now, he used to fly wearing his uniform with his pistols. When was the last time you saw someone with a gun in his hand? And see how he's pointing it? I have other pictures where they, hey! But he was a really nice guy. Judy told me that he actually came to Judy's wedding. His name was really Ronaldo Duncan. I don't know. But he thought Duncan Ronaldo sounded better. So here's Joey Brown. I saw him the other night. I turned on the TV. Around the World in 80 Days was on. He's in that movie, as is everybody. Here he is behind the bar at Club El Bianco. They wouldn't tell anybody. So you go up and say, "I want a drink, Mac." You're like, "Coming right up." And you're like, "Hey, you look familiar." "Yeah." No, I just have one of those faces.
Very cool.
Oh, yeah. He's one of my favorites. I have a picture in the book that is the funniest picture. And whenever my kids see it, I guarantee they always just burst out laughing. They don't know who this guy is. They just think he's just hilarious. They were impressed when I told them that Bugs Bunny says hello to Jerry in the cartoon when Bugs Bunny went to the Academy Awards.
Right.
And he sees him in the receiving line. He goes, "Hey, Jerry." Those googly eyes, you get it every time. And Pat O'Brien was a big friend of not only the restaurant, but he was a great friend of Mike Rotunnno. There is an aviation connection with Pat O'Brien. His breakout role was the front page, which was financed by Howard Hughes, who owned TWA. All right, it's like, you know, a separation, but that's my connection, my aviation connection to that of mine. But he has some great stories in the book. Here's Arnold Palmer in the restaurant, in the kitchen, looks like. And this is Butch Bianco. He used to work at Streets and Sand. He retired this summer. He has some great stories about it. He told me that his dad, it was Thanksgiving, and his father said, all right, well, the whole family were going to the restaurant, and they would ordinarily be closed on Thanksgiving. So they were all in the restaurant, and there's a knock at the door, and Butch goes, he's probably 5 or 6, and he goes and he opens the door, and there is his idol, Black Bart, from the Cisco, Pancho Cisco, the Cisco kid, and goes, hey, son, is your dad here? And little Butch Bianco turns around and walks to his father and goes, Dad, Black Bart wants to see you. And then the whole road show of Pancho and Cisco, all in the bandoleros and the uniforms, they all came in. They brought everything with the horses. And they all had Thanksgiving at Pueblo Bianco. Jacques Cousteau, this was taken at O'Hare. After Midway died there for a while, Mike Rotunnno also moved to O'Hare. Harry, this was taken at Midway. Mike Rotunnno said this guy was the biggest SOB he ever met in his life.
Really?
But again, he was a movie star. He could turn it on when he wanted. Jane Russell and Mike Rotunnno at O'Hare. Probably taken in, I would say, maybe early 1970s, late 1960s. Miss Henny she invented figure skating, basically. And the Wirtz family, ran the Chicago Stadium, and Arthur Wirtz would fly in Sonia for the ice skating. Escapades, right. Now, here's what you didn't know about her. Well, you might have known, she was Hitler's favorite skater. Well, I won't fault her for that. I mean, that wasn't her fault that Hitler liked her a lot. But I think she kind of downplayed that in the PR after the war. But she swore like a sailor. She's a real mouth. And so Mike Rotunnno thought it would be fun. It was the middle of winter, and he thought, hey, I know, let's make an ice rink. So he knew everybody. He had clout at the airport, and so he knew the airport manager. So they had like a fire truck come out, and they made an ice rink on the tarmac. And she gets off the plane, and Rotunnno says, hey, Sonia, can you do like a triple axel for us or something? And she looks at the ice rink with a horror on her face, and he's like, come on, let's do this. And she says, I'm not going to go there and break my ass. Not very ladylike, but she could turn on a smile when she needed. Hopalong Cassidy. My dad helped me with these. He got all excited. He looked at all the singing cowboys, and he knew, Rotunnno knew them all. Roy Rogers.
Oh, yeah, one of my favorites.
That's Judy sitting on Roy Rogers' lap there. Jack Dempsey, the fighter. A lot of pictures of Jack Dempsey. There Mike Rotunnno's right next to him. It's really in a lot of pictures. This is Judy. Geez, I don't know how old she is in this picture. Maybe 2. I don't know what's more impressive, the size of that tire. I don't know what kind of plane that was, although I was probably a DC-3, I would imagine, just knowing the time period. That was probably the late 1930s. There's Judy, next to Jimmy Stewart and Mimi. This was taken at O'Hare. So Mike Rotunnno would take a picture of Jimmy Stewart, and then he'd say, hey, you want to go to the cloud room and have some coffee? And Jimmy Stewart would be like, yeah, that'd be fun. Yeah. So one day it was raining out, so they went up to the cloud room, and Jimmy Stewart had like the fedora kind of pulled over his head, and the waitress runs up to Mike and says, hey, Mike, Jack Benny's downstairs. And he goes, say hi to Jimmy Stewart. And she looked at Jimmy Stewart and said, this ain't Jimmy Stewart, it's one of your crummy newspaper pals. And Jimmy Stewart, she stormed off. And Jimmy Stewart was like, that's pretty funny. I think this was taken at O'Hare. There's another Phyllis Diller. The next slide is her with Mike. They got on real well. They asked me, Chris, do you know who this is? This pilot. And I looked at the picture. I said, yeah, that's my grandfather.
Oh my goodness.
The Ryan Navion. My mother, this is a green plane. My grandfather, Pierce, there he is. He picked up this plane in person in San Diego at the Ryan factory that also happened to make the Spirit of St. Louis.
Right.
And my mother flew in this plane cross country when she was 12, and I have color movies of that flight.
Really?
And the coolest part is at the end of it is they're shooting a landing on runway 4 there through the canopy. This was like 1949. Very cool, very cool. So I almost fell out of my chair when I saw this. Now my grandfather, they sold tickets here in this little shack here. See Chicago from the air. My grandmother sold the tickets. My grandfather flew. He also flew a DC-3 more often than not. But if it was just one or two people, he and his one of his fellow pilots would take people up.
You remember the name Tony Makowitz?
Tony Makowitz used to fly this plane.
That's who flew with him.
Yes, in fact, I think you and I talked before. You probably flew in this plane
Yeah.
because there was the two Navions.
Yeah.
And these were kind of the workhorses of Monarch Air Service. Now this is where it gets weird. I'm looking at this picture. So Mike Rotunnno was asked, this is the Mother of the Year award for the woman from Berlin. Okay, that was her prize was they got to fly her around. Okay. Big deal in 1948.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this. So Mike Rotunnno takes this picture. Of course, he had no idea that he was taking a picture of the man whose grandson would write his biography. Radio stars.
Not McNeil. Yeah.
The Breakfast Club, which, you know, if you watch the Today Show didn't hold a candle to the Breakfast Club. And I believe it was, Robert, was it broadcast from Chicago?
Yes.
Okay,
It was
yeah.
at the top of the Ellington Hotel.
Right, that one of the hotels.
Wasn't it the
Tip Top Tavern.
Yeah,
Tip
Tip
Top
Top
Tavern,
Room
okay.
or something.
Yeah.
And it was huge. I mean, the kind of ratings, everybody would listen to the Breakfast Club. So he was one of the biggest stars in the United States, probably with Arthur Godfrey, another radio. Here's Arthur Godfrey. Now, he also, like Jack Benny, Godfrey made the transition from radio to television. Not all of them could make that leap, but he flew in the Midway a lot. And he was also a pilot. I believe he flew his own DC-3 also. So he came into Monarch many times. Again, Richard, I think this is Kennedy Nixon. It might have been the kind of in-between years between when he ran for governor and ran for president. Kind of an embarrassing story. Rotunnno would be at the airport and Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General, would come in. And because Rotunnno had known the Kennedy family for many years, going back to when Joe was in Hollywood, whenever, you know, he'd be there with his camera, and then Robert Kennedy would say, "We'll get off the plane, and you know, here's Richard, Mayor Daley, right? Here's Mayor Daley," and Robert Kennedy would say, "Oh, Mike, how you doing? Hey, good to see you." You know, and Mayor Daley standing, "Oh, hey, good to see you. How's it?" And so it got kind of embarrassing because he felt bad, you know, the mayor standing there. So he used to kind of hide until after the mayor saw him, and then they would tell him. Rotunnno would put out these newsletters at O'Hare, and he was a great promoter, and he would have pictures of all the celebrities. He's reading the newsletter, and I have these little quotes from Bob Hope and all these movie stars saying, "Oh yeah, O'Hare Illustrated News, Mike, my favorite magazine." You know, he would have these kind of blurbs there. One of the rare times where Mike Rotunnno is just sitting, not using his camera. But what I thought I would do is, again, I had to squeeze a lot of material out of the book because of space limitations. So I thought I would read you something I had to cut out. I didn't cut it out because it wasn't interesting. I cut it out because what it came down to is if I didn't have a picture that illustrated the anecdote, I would get rid of it. And boy, do I wish I had the picture for this one. I'll read it to you just right now. So Mike Rotunnno called Joey Lewis, not the guy behind the bar, but another comedian.
Joey Lewis, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
King of the nightclubs of Chicago. But he ran with a tough crowd. Rotunnno he had first met Lewis at the Chicago nightclub Midnight Follies in 1924. And he recalled that Lewis was the favorite jester of the mob monarch Al Capone, actually, and had a large following among the underworld characters. Lewis's wit was fast, and he had no patience for hecklers, and he cut them down with his jokes. So in 1927, Lewis worked every gin joint and club he could find, and was making $1,000 a week at the Green Mill. Who's been to the Green Mill? John Fogerty, who ran a club across town called the Rendezvous on North Clark, in diversity lured Lewis away from the Green Mill with the promise of a bigger salary. After Lewis made it known to the Green Mill's management that he was leaving to play the Rendezvous, Lewis received a visitor the next day who was waiting in front of his hotel in Commonwealth. The caller was Machine Gun Jack McGurn, who owned a stake in the Green Mill. As Lewis strolled down Diversity Avenue, McGurn asked him to stay at the Green Mill. Lewis refused, saying he had already agreed to play the Rendezvous. "You'll never live to see it open," Machine Gun McGurn told him. Rotunnno recounted what happened next. A few days later, Machine Gun and his boy slashed Joe's face, slit his tongue in vocal cords, and almost bludgeoned him to death, and they left him for dead in a room in the Commonwealth Park. My friend Dr. Henry Shireston operated on him, and he made a speedy recovery, Rotunnno recalled. Pat O'Brien, who we saw on that earlier slide, in his autobiography was in Chicago during this time. Quote, "I'll never forget the wonderful night Joe walked into the comedy club after weeks in the hospital. His badly scarred head and throat still swelled in bed, swathed in bandages. We gave him a tremendous ovation. He laughed. 'I hereby serve notice on the entertainment world that I will be back before long. Somebody give me a glass.'" So Machine Gun McGurn got the same treatment as Lewis by the mob shortly afterwards, recalled Rotunnno. McGurn was clubbed to death in a nightclub several months later. It was a long, difficult recovery for Lewis, but he did bounce back, first working third-rate clubs and working back into the first-rate ones. Rotunnno often saw Lewis perform at the Chicago Best Photographers Association annual banquets, and when in Chicago, Lewis would hit town with his best friend, Judge Abraham Lincoln Merowitz.
Yeah.
You probably remember him. He swore in every mayor, from I think Richard J. Daley to Richard M. Daley. You might have, if this story sounds familiar, you probably remember the movie The Joker is Wild, which is right, Frank Sinatra. It's about this story. So in 1929, struggling with his voice to get back in the clubs, Lewis found himself working again at the Green Mill, and he was grateful for the work. It was after closing, and two gangsters sat at their table, getting steadily more intoxicated, as they said. They were the Gusenberg brothers, Frank and Peter, dangerous killers who did work, for the Bugs Moran gang. They were counting thousands of dollars in cash at the bar. In the course of the evening, Frank Gusenberg slipped a wad of bills into Lewis's pocket, a gift or obligation that Lewis wanted no part in. The next day, he decided to meet the boys at the SMC Carthage Company at 2122 North Park. And I was there yesterday, by the way, which was a booze drop for the Moran gang, and where the Gusenbergs could readily be found hanging out. Before heading out, Lewis decided to give himself a shave, and in the course of shaving, he cut himself badly with the razor. This delayed him, and so he went out on the street rather than walk. He jumped in a cab. As he got close to Clark, driving down south on Clark, he saw Frank Gusenberg's body being carried out on a stretcher to an ambulance. It was, the date, by the way, was St. Valentine's Day, 1929. And several men would lose their lives to gunmen dressed as policemen. Some say sent by Capone, or as the press reported. Of course, Lewis, had he not caught himself shaving, he might have been one of those bodies being carried out. Lewis wasn't the only one present that day. Mike Rotunnno was working at the Hudson Avenue police station shooting photos for the Chicago American when he got a call from his editor, Harry Romanoff. Drop everything and get over to 2122 North Clark. Okay. All I got from Rami said was that there had been a terrible shooting. Rotunnno arrived at the site and forced his way through the mob in front. What he saw was, quote, something I'll never forget. The room was packed with police, but the center of attention were the bodies, strewn, quote, strewn along the wall, and blood was all over the floor. The thing that he remembered most was there was a dog barking, and one of the men was still alive, twitching in the corner. Rotunnno took a bunch of photos, and he noticed that one of the victims had a wad of money in his hand, a $10 bill, soaked in blood. I told Captain O'Malley that the man was still alive, and by the time we got back to the victim, the money was gone. The captain was furious and demanded that whoever took the bill hand it over now. There was no response. Now, wouldn't I love to find those pictures that Mike Rotunnno took that night? But there's a lot of pictures that I wish I could have had. But that's part of the fun aspect of this book. Every picture in here has a photograph that is tied to the anecdote. And when I was putting the book together, the publisher, when I sent them the photos, they were like, I can't believe these pictures. And I was like, well, neither can I. You know, I've been looking at them for years. I mean, the quality of those speed graphics. You know, I take all my pictures with my iPhone. It's not a speed graphic, but I wish I had a speed graphic. But anyway, before I conclude, two things. I want to thank you for coming tonight. On the night of the Olympics, you could be all home watching badminton women being expelled. But you came here instead, and that makes me feel good. But also, in light of the Olympics, I started thinking about London, a city I know pretty well. And I thought about Patrick Hicks. He's an author that I admire. He wrote a book called This London. And since we're talking about photographs, I wanted to just finish up and conclude with some lines he wrote about photography. And this is from something called Taking Photographs for Strangers. Now this takes place in London. Could be Des Plaines, could be Club El Bianco, could be Midway Airport. I like to think that it's Midway Airport. It happens in their famous landmarks. They offer their cameras. I take each one. Like a keyhole, I put it to my eye and spy into their world. With a finger click, I pour amber onto the earth. Birds are in mid-flight, water stops, a nugget of sunlight jewels a window. I slide everything into place. Pieces are puzzles into a frame. And when these tourists fly home, part of me goes with them to far-off lands I will never see. Long after this memory abandons me, when it skips into the fog, they will still have a snapshot of a world I once saw. What a strange gift. They can crawl inside my eye, point at the dazzling world, and they can see everything exactly as I have forgotten.